All right. Hello, everyone. It's 4 p.m., so I think we'll get started. I'd like to welcome everyone to the September 2020 Science Policy Skills Hour, Advocating for Science in Our Community. My name is Juliana Brutman, and I am the president of the Graduate and Professional Student Science Policy Initiative. Our organization advocates for evidence-based policy at the local, state, and federal level. We are a proud member of the National Science Policy Network and also Washington State University Graduate and Professional Student Association affiliate organization. Today, our Skills Hour will focus on learning how to advocate for science in our communities. We have two phenomenal speakers, Dr. Douglas Call, who will speak about how to write an effective letter to the editor, and Dr. Laura Lockard, MS, who will discuss how to combat COVID-19 misinformation on social media. Each speaker will talk for 20 minutes, followed by a 10-minute question and answer session. Our YouTube live format allows audience members to ask questions at any time in the chat feature. At the end of each speaker's time, I will ask questions from the YouTube live chat to the speaker. Due to time constraints, the Q&A portion of this seminar is limited to 10 minutes per speaker. So without further ado, I have the honor of introducing our first speaker, Dr. Douglas Call. Dr. Call is a Regents Professor of Molecular Epidemiology and the Associate Research Director for Research and Graduate Education in the Paul G. Allen School for Global Animal Health at Washington State University in Pullman, Washington. Dr. Call frequently has letters to the editor published in the Moscow-Pullman Daily News that persuasively integrate data as evidence to support his views. Today, Dr. Call will speak about how he crafts these letters and provide the blueprint for others interested in learning to also write and publish evidence-based letters to the editor. So with that, Dr. Call, the screen is yours.
Excellent. I'm just going to go without slides today. It's too complicated from this venue. So, but thank you, everybody. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today, and it's a lot of fun. I'm speaking more as a science professional as opposed to a faculty member at Washington State University. And I'll kind of touch on why I take that approach to this. I actually started here back in the year 2000, and it didn't take us long to see what was being printed in the local newspaper to get involved. So locally, we do have the Moscow-Pullman Daily News, but we also have the Lewiston Morning Tribune. Those are our two local papers. They're actually owned by the same company, but they have independent editorial staff, editorial boards, and they're actually very good boards. And we also have the Spokesman's Review, which is our next local paper of any size, and it's definitely a different venue. And I'm happy to answer questions about those as well. So I probably started publishing letters in about 2002 into both papers, usually in response to editorials there by some local writers who were a little loose with their facts. And by 2010, I'd completed two-year stints of what was called the Town Crier in the Moscow-Pullman Daily News. And that was where we competed to get a slot in this cadre of local authors who would publish then one column, about a 700-word column, every 3 months for a period of 2 years. And that was a lot of fun just because it allowed really junior writers from an editorial standpoint, such as myself, gain a lot of experience and present some different thoughts to the community. I've been a regular contributor to the local paper since then, mostly through letters to the editor, and I'll talk a bit about how those are structured separately from actual columns or editorial opinions that you can also publish. In May of 2019, I became a regular editorial columnist for the Moscow-Pullman Daily News, and I now publish about one column every 2 weeks, which is a bit of a drag on your time. But it's also, again, an opportunity to address in a really timely manner some issues in our community. And one of those actually has to do with quality of information people use in newspapers. And I'll tell you an example of that showed up today in the paper. Now, why do I do this? I mean, there's nothing forcing me to do it. There's nothing forcing you to do it. But the reality is we bring a lot of skills to the table to help the lay public understand what's going on in science, and more importantly, how that translates into their lives. And if we don't do it, the science journalists do as good a job as they can, but they don't really necessarily understand the nuances of the importance or able to express it in a manner that we might be able to, with some important caveats that we'll also mention here briefly. Most of the time, it's really important not only to convey those exciting findings that we see in the literature, or that we actually have at institutions such as Washington State or University of Idaho locally here, but we can also correct erroneous stories. So a good example, real recently, we've had several letters and columns arguing that face masks are useless for COVID-19. So it's not hard to then dip into PubMed, pull up a number of studies that have actually tried to address this question in different ways, and then craft a narrative explaining how that's been misinterpreted, or here are the arguments of why that individual was completely off base, and just trying to get more factual information out there. Of course, you have to write this politely, professionally, and not actually attack people. This works from there now. But why do I personally do this? And I think this will become more apparent to you, those of you who go into the academy. Now, as a private individual or private citizen, working in a company, you may or may not feel as comfortable doing this, but those of us in the academy, particularly in the tenure track ranks or faculty lines, ultimately, particularly after we achieve tenure that's awarded to us, we can actually do a lot that most people can't. I mean, as a businessman, I'm not going to write in what might be considered a controversial, inflammatory column in the newspaper, but as a faculty member, as long as it's professional, then yes, I can. And I can express unpopular ideas. I can express challenging ideas. I can challenge community leaders, and without fear of loss of my job. Now, if I was a businessman running, say, a gas station, I might lose some business. So I might think very differently about doing this kind of an activity. We're really in a privileged class in America by having that tenure protection process. And that's why we have it, not just for writing paper letters to the editor, but the scholarship that we do, so that we're not being held back by fear of retaliation from our organizations, which, by the way, I never felt fear at WSU, because again, I was writing letters while I was still an assistant professor and wasn't protected by tenure. There's always been wide support within the community here for what I've been able to contribute, and I appreciate that a great deal. I agree. I recognize that not all faculty are going to feel that way, but after you get tenure, join the party and let's get out there and communicate with the community. So there's really two types of ways to do this, and one is that letter to the editor, and I'll talk a little bit more in detail about that. These are typically pretty short, 150 words to 300 words, depending on the newspaper. I think Spokesman's Review is limited to 150 words, but the Lewiston Trib is 250, and Moscow-Pullman is actually incredibly generous with 300 words. Every one of those words counts when you're trying to pack a story into a small piece of real estate on paper. So I appreciate it when you get that kind of luxury. Now, editorials, in my case, are up to 700 words long, and I typically top out about 200. There's 696 about every time, taking advantage of that full space to get those ideas in there. These, again, what they're looking for are topics that are very timely to the community, informative, or that address erroneous material in the paper. Some newspapers get a lot of letters, and they don't have a lot of them to devote much space to this, either via columns or via letters. So they're going to sift through what they receive, and they're going to look for the stuff that is most timely, most informative in the community, and they're going to discard the other ones. Don't be discouraged if you run into that. You just keep trying. Spokesman's Review is a paper that has to do that. It's a volume problem or challenge, and that's a good challenge to have. We're incredibly luxurious here because both of our local papers, I've never seen them hold anything back. It is a free-for-all, and they'll fill up pages of letters during the election period in particular. So you can see a lot of interesting views. So if you go online and ask queries such as how do I write a letter to the editor or so forth, or a science column or something like that, you're going to find a lot of different advice. Although one thing they all focus on is that you do need to watch the word count. Perfect excuse for an editor to ditch your letter is dismissed by even just one word. So pay attention to what the limitations are. And again, every paper is going to be a little different on that. I really want to emphasize that writing, particularly in this kind of venue, well, any kind of writing is an art. I've never met anyone I'd call a natural writer, so to speak, but I've run into very skilled writers. And skilled writers is the skill comes from practice. So don't expect to have super great columns or letters when you first get started, although you might hit it well, but I do strongly recommend that you get feedback before submitting any kind of written document. This is internal checks for you, your family, colleague, friend can read through these documents and decide if your internal logic makes sense, that you're going through a progression of ideas to reach your central point that you can present. You're literally telling a story, and you want to have it internally consistent so that when the reader hits the main points that you're after, either if you structure at the beginning or at the end of the document, they understand why you got there, and they can decide whether they agree with you or not. But if it's a mishmash of misses on the logic or the motivation, you're not going to carry your audience very long. I also strongly recommend, actually keep this in mind for controversial emails as well, always sleep on it. Write these things up, give yourself at least a day in advance before, when you think you have the finally polished copy, and don't submit it. Wait until the deadline. Look at it a couple of hours beforehand, read it through. Believe it or not, you're going to continue finding grammar errors or other kind of editorial errors, or you might suddenly realize you missed some key piece in the logic that you need to fix. Then go ahead and review or submit it. Pat yourself on the back for your contribution and don't sweat it. Oftentimes you will garner, particularly on a controversial column, you will garner a response. Never take these things personally. It's just like getting a review back from a manuscript. I always know I'm going to be a little uptight when I get those things. So my defense is to grab that review and set it aside for at least 2 days. And then I can be in the right frame of mind to come back and look at it. The other obvious rules that you want to keep in mind, particularly on letters to the editor, is to try and limit your message to one key message, one key take-home message that you want your reader to have at the end of the day. There's just not enough real estate to try and push anything more than that. An example, the other thing, of course, is to document using reputable sources. Unfortunately, we don't have the space to add full citations that you would normally do, for example, in a peer-reviewed publication. But you can cite, for example, in May, this Lancet published a study that told us X, Y, Z. Always keep those references handy in case somebody contacts you and says, hey, show me the reference. And you can just pop it right out to them. And that has happened, by the way. In fact, in one case, I made an error and had to write a brief piece apologizing for that. And it was caught by one of the readers. So I really appreciated that. Having that information at my fingertips allowed me to do that. But it also allows you and the reader to double check that you're using reputable sources. So this morning, a local columnist wrote a piece arguing that universal mail-in ballots is fraught with rampant fraud. And one of the sources that he cited was a tabloid magazine. So at least he admitted it was a tabloid magazine. So maybe my next column actually ought to be on that particular point of how important it is to have reputable sources to back up the message that you want to get across. And also as scientists, we really specialize in jargon. And there's a really important reason to do that, is we need to have a concise and extraordinarily precise way of expressing ideas, and it won't work with the public. So that's where part of that art comes in communication, is how to dissect and deconstruct that language in a way that you can still efficiently present ideas and convince people of your message, or get the take-home message without burying them in jargon. And believe me, they'll just move on to the next letter or the next article if you add too much material, too much jargon or any jargon into your writing. Some of the advice that you'll find has to do with credentials and affiliation. If you're writing an article on some scientific idea or outcome, you're advised to give your affiliation. So you're an assistant professor at Washington State University. I want to just caution you a little bit about that. It really depends on the context. So if you're writing an opinion piece, particularly if it has nothing to do with your actual job. It's okay to include your educational credentials, you're an MD, you're a DVM, or a PhD, but I don't recommend using your formal job title and your affiliation, because you don't want anyone to draw the conclusion that you're representing the views of your institution or your company. That's a fast way to become very unpopular. So putting, and actually in a crowd like you have here in the Inland Northwest, even putting down your educational credentials can oftentimes be offsetting because there's a little bit of rebellion against expertise. So the way I usually sign my piece is just to say I'm a microbiologist. Some microbiologists might even argue that's not true, but at least for the public, it works just fine. And again, you can put those other degrees. MDs tend to do this a lot, and it works for them. Now, if on the other hand, you're taking the time to work with your communications unit at your institution, so for a WSU, for example, I would work with Lower Lockard. If we were trying to present a piece about policy that the U.S. Congress is considering in my area for antibiotic resistance, or how to fund research in antibiotic development, I would work real closely with Laura and others within her unit and within my unit to craft a piece that is well honed, factually very correct, and that gives you a lot of backstops to make sure that you're presenting a really solid argument and that it's consistent with the message of the institution. Definitely use your affiliation at that point because you are representing the institution. That's a really important caveat to keep in mind when you see those pieces of advice about that. Okay. On a personal level, I just wanted to mention that one of the reasons I do this, besides that obligation from the fact that I'm a tenured faculty member, I'm a state employee, and I need to give something back to the community. Not everybody sees it that way, by the way, but that's fine. I think the most important reason is actually fairly therapeutic. An opportunity to rant, and then professionally, of course, and compose what I hope is a well-crafted narrative that addresses a community concern. That's a good reason to celebrate. It also helps really keep your writing skills sharp. And one thing about a letter to the editor to the Lewiston Morning Trib, limited to 250 words, you might all be very familiar, or you're going to be familiar with the fact that most abstracts are actually limited to 250 words. Being able to figure out kind of naturally how to condense your ideas into that short amount of real estate is actually a really handy skill for writing abstracts for papers and for presentations. And I have to admit, it's satisfying to get positive feedback from friends and colleagues, which is far more frequent than negative feedback. And that makes for a good day as well. Having said all that, it does take time. It does take energy. Every one of these columns costs me 2 to 6 hours every 2 weekends out of the month, which is a lot of time that could be done doing something else. But again, I think the pros far outweigh the cons, and that's why I keep at this. And that's all I have, Julianne. I'm happy to address any kind of questions if people have any.
That was fantastic. Thank you. It looks like we do have a few questions.
Excellent.
I'll pull them up. So the first question for Dr. Call is, do you target certain pieces to particular newspapers?
We have with, so for example, a piece we presented on changes in FDA rules for antibiotic use in livestock. We did present a paper to the Seattle Times to gain a larger audience for that. There are some topics I've debated trying to see if I could get into the New York Times, but I just haven't had the energy to try that yet. Otherwise, yes, I just target both my local papers, and now I'm a columnist. It's primarily just the Moscow-Pullman Daily News, because that's about all the time and energy I have left. If you want a larger audience, again, you can go to those larger papers in the cities.
Perfect. So the next question then, are your letters usually a response to something, or do you sometimes just, sorry, I'll read the question verbatim and then rephrase it, or do you sometimes just have something you have on your mind to write about? In other words, how do you choose your topics?
Both. Letters can be treated both ways, although they're more commonly a response to something you've seen in the paper, to another column, to another writer, letter writer. But if you have something you want to bring to the attention to the community, that's fair game. We're all welcome to share opinions.
Perfect.
I think for me, letters are more often responses for me. But that's, again, I have a larger forum through a column to present new views.
Perfect. Looks like there's one more question coming and it's being typed out. Here we go. So do you feel like you actively censor or avoid certain topics due to the political environment surrounding them? Or does anything come to mind as strictly, quote unquote, off limits and not worth the time in your experience?
So it's kind of three parts to that, right? There's would I self-censor? I will self-censor on one topic, and that is my institution. I have written pieces about Washington State University, more of a questioning about a direction we've gone, but it's more of a question to the community and an invitation for a broader conversation. Your First Amendment rights cover all of those kind of things and the usual types of writing that I do. It's much less clear that if I were to come in and with inside knowledge and thoroughly criticize my own institution, that's actually not covered under the First Amendment, or at least that's under significant debate. I will not do that. It would be self-destructive anyway. It's not good for the institution. That's not the venue we go through. We actually have a lot of ways to have those conversations that don't have to come through the newspaper. So that, I guess you call that self-censoring, or I'd call it, I have better ways to do that, which would be more productive. See, the other part of that was, there are topics and times where you just figure it's not worth your trouble. If you start getting in a round robin of criticisms with somebody in letter writing, at some point, this isn't worth your time, and you can walk away. Did I cover all the parts of that?
I believe so, and that looks like if I'll give the audience about another 30 seconds to submit any questions. But if not, thank you, Dr. Call, for that excellent talk, and really was informative for learning about the newspaper processes.
Sure, and feel free to email me. I mean, I'm easy to find in global animal health, and happy to have a conversation either via Zoom or email if you want to talk about things, or if you want me to look at an article or a letter and get some advice. I'm happy to help you out.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. And our next speaker is Laura Lockard, MS. Laura holds a Master of Science degree from Northeastern University and currently serves as the Director of Public Affairs for the Paul G. Allen School for Global Animal Health at Washington State University in Pullman, Washington. Laura boasts an impressive resume with extensive outreach experience advocating for research on the delivery of disease interventions and preventative healthcare at the local, federal, and global levels. Today, Laura will speak about how to effectively combat COVID-19 misinformation on social media platforms. And with that, Laura, we're happy to have you as our second speaker.
Great. Thank you very much. It's very nice to be here with all of you, and it's always fun to hear Doug talk about his op-eds and letters to the editor. That's my favorite. I do have some slides I'm going to run through real quick. I'd like to have a conversation because I would imagine you'll have some questions. Sorry, I'm trying to get it into presentation mode. Okay, Juliana, can you see that properly?
Yes, I believe you are good.
Great. So I'm going to do just a broad swath, but basically everything that we talk about here today is COVID or not, it's good practice. So keep it in mind for COVID, as COVID's provided this extraordinary experience of combating misinformation. And I hope that this will help give you some tools at the end that will help you deal with misinformation and sharing facts. So just real quick, I wanted to run through the primary body of my work for research and science advocacy is strategic communications. And by strategic communications, that's long game. That is I know where I want to be in 2 years with this, research program, and how do I get there? What are the steps, the communication steps that we need to take to get there? And there's a giant body of work around strategic comms, but it's, I would suggest taking a good look at it, because it's playing chess versus checkers when it comes to the media and comes to getting information out. If I do strategic communications wrong, then I end up at the bottom of my list there, where I have to do crisis comms. So I try to do everything I can to inoculate ourselves from anything that would cause us what I would consider a crisis. So I just real quick, misinformation, disinformation gets interchanged, and they are different. Misinformation is it happens. Disinformation is with intent. So we're seeing a lot of disinformation out there as well now, with unscrupulous characters presenting a false narrative. And so I'm going to focus on misinformation, and you'll see that as we get through this a bit. But the goals in my mind are always to inform the public, inform our peers what we're doing in the research space and the science space, fight the noise to the extent possible, and always be sharing facts. It should be a daily routine. So a little bit deeper, because we're in a pandemic, creates all kinds of extra layers of trouble. So, people's behaviors change dramatically, and having the demand for information is insatiable. People are scared, they're anxious, they're confused. I think we also suffer greatly from the general public not understanding basic biology, human biology, which then leads them off on tangents that because they don't understand how the body works, that they can believe some of the misinformation that's out there. I also think that we've all seen now that science moves much slower than the public demand for information. So we can't keep up in the science space. We can be proactive as possible. And you've seen some of these non-peer reviewed publications coming out that will probably be excellent and fine, but there's also this dichotomy of non-peer reviewed getting taken as fully flushed concepts and research. So there's a lot of information out there that is, you have to kind of decide, pick your battles as far as how you want to share your facts, but also combat misinformation and make sure that folks have access to the right information, to the factual information. And I'm sure you know this, but people they go to the internet to fill the gaps. So whatever's accessible and whatever is easy to find and replicated multiple times, people tend to absorb that, whether it's correct or not. So for yourselves, just as Doug was talking about, there's a lot of things you can do individually and then also do as a group with this group or other third-party resources. But the best thing to, Doug was talking a bit about tabloid journalism as a source. There's a lot of information out there that's very good that can help you understand the source before you go down a rabbit hole and try to combat something that's wrong. And one of the things that's out there that I go to a lot, and they have a lot of excellent tools, is the Center for an Informed Public. And yes, it is at the University of Washington. WSU does have a relationship with this organization, but they're doing a lot of great work right now, doing research, getting publications out that have to do with this exact topic, how to look at this misinformation and how to ensure the public and get them the right information in the tools that they're using. So that tends to be right now social media and the internet, digital media. So they're very good about sharing resources, but I think it also comes down to us to do these kinds of exercises and talk with each other and look at best practices and try to figure out how we can work together to keep the facts out there. The other thing I really like to do, and it's part of my coalition building days, is just third-party support and working with external organizations, having we do roundtables and summits, and a lot of that work it's all very good because you're also building relationships. For example, if we have an experience with a false accusation around animal research, well, I can go to the Northwest Association for Biomedical Research, which is one of our partners and a good friend, and say, hey, we have this problem. I'd like to get your advice, your guidance. And it's really nice to have some of these external organizations that understand and know the facts that to seek help and guidance from. Prioritizing, there's just some battles you won't win. So you part of that comes with experience, and I think also what Doug said is writing and keeping your skills honed and writing a lot, and just the experience comes with practice. So I think you prioritize the things that you really want to fight for, and get the facts out, and that will get you a long way versus trying to change minds of that you won't ever change. Is a nice way to put it. Proactive outreach, this is what I try to do every day. So reaching out to our partners, our research partners, and at Allen School, we have some really broad research programs where we have NIH, CDC, universities, other research centers and institutes. And I do my best to stay engaged with them and have a point of contact at those places. So again, we're working together, and we're working for the same cause, the same common good of facts. And I also find that from a personal point of view, I can call my friends and go, oh my gosh, let me tell you this. And so, they're really good sounding board for certain things that come up. So I've always been a big networker. That's kind of how I'm built. So I would argue that that's one of the best places to spend your time, is doing like what we're doing here today, but also networking and getting to know the partners and the folks that are outside of our institution that we work with all the time. Succinct response is exactly what Doug was talking about. So I won't go into a lot there, but that is the key to success. It is really hard, in my experience working with researchers, it's really hard to find the common language that works and makes the point quick. And so that is the key to success. And I can't emphasize that enough. If you can take out the 5-syllable words in the Latin, it makes a big difference. So I think that Doug covered all of that well, and it's that is the key. So I wanted to show you something that this also plays nicely into what Doug was talking about, is this media bias chart. There's an organization that puts this out once a month. And so they're tracking political bias. And since we're in a political sphere right now, and COVID has been very politicized, I just wanted to show you this to show that this kind of research is out there and accessible. This basically gives you an idea. And as an example, if I get the wonkette calls me and has some, something that is just severely wrong, how much time do I spend on that? Probably not a lot. Now, if I get CNN calls and they've got something wrong, I'm going to spend a lot of time on that. I'm going to spend my time in that top corner, there's middle section of this diagram. And that's how I prioritize the work that I do in communications and public affairs. So I just wanted you to know that this is a source that's out there. So some of the basic questions are always who, what, when, where, why, and that's the story. it's an old school format, but it works. And so I just want you guys to think about who's the audience you're trying to address and or you're trying to influence. And so generally speaking, I'm with the Allen School, it's a lot of the public. I want the public to understand the great work that's happening, and I want the public to understand how this is going to help them as an individual, the research that we do. We have a lot of interaction with the federal delegation, elected officials, because what we're doing is also has a national and international ramifications. And we also have great investments by state and federal government. So I'm always communicating and wanting to get back to them and make sure everyone understands what we're doing. And when we hit our milestones and just that, again, constant communication. And then the channels, as you're looking at misinformation and trying to figure out how best to address something, Doug talked about it a little bit too, but choose the channel wisely. Spend your time where you think that audience is going to be. I'm spending a lot more time on Twitter now than I ever have, because the science community, as surprising as it might be, is really jazzed on Twitter. So, and it's really nice because they're having conversations with one another on Twitter. And so the information that we're sending out gets to bigger and bigger audiences. And so I think that for our land of research and science, it's a good avenue, a good channel. So third-party communications channels goes back to what I was talking about with outreach. So I can go now to the International Livestock Research Institute in Nairobi and say, hey, we've got a press release coming out tomorrow. Can you share it with your media people? And that gets it out in a whole layer of media folks that I wouldn't necessarily reach. So there's these partners that can be great resources and great, and vice versa. I am always happy to share what our partners are doing, because it shows that camaraderie, the collaboration, and the fact that we're all connected. So I think there's a lot more power in numbers in that way. Letters to the editor, opinions, op-eds, we talked about. The other place that we didn't talk about, that Doug didn't tap on as much, but the chats and the blogs and other digital media, there's a lot more opportunity there now because people are so starved for information. They're just looking for content. So if you have some favorites and you find that they are reputable, reach out to them as well, because there's a lot of times that you can get some information out that again, reaches a different audience. It might not be the perfect audience every time, but the more that you have online, the more you will be heard and found. And so I'm a big fan of also reaching out to key blogs and other digital media resources. And then of course, traditional broadcast media is what we were talking about. I recently had to do a correction in the New York Times because we have a new center for research in emerging infectious diseases in Nairobi, and they listed every other university but us. And so I reached out 3 times to try to get a correction, and it's very difficult in that environment, but I tried. And I think it's always important to try for a correction. If you know it's wrong or it's not absolutely correct. In this, we just got left out, so it didn't get corrected. But I think that is also a great tool to use. And I think with the regional papers, it's much more likely to happen versus like the national papers, international papers. So messengers, I wanted to talk about that a little bit because that says a lot about, and that, messengers, there's a lot of polling out there about who's the best messengers for information, who do people trust? And that's been shifting as of late because we have had this politicized narrative around science and research. So think about who, if you've built your message, think about who the right person is to sign the op-ed. If it's not you, is it, someone, or is it, somebody that you think would be heard to that audience, whatever that respective audience is. So I'm in alignment absolutely with Doug on the communications professionals. That's what we're here for. And so I would imagine within your areas, you have the communications director, communications teams within the various departments across WSU, that if you reached out to them, I'm sure they'd be thrilled, because it's usually the opposite, trying to find researchers that want to talk about their work. So do reach out. Third-party experts is just, again, that goes back to my thinking around having these external organizations and other partners that help us with our messages. And then the one thing that I don't think Doug did mention is the succinct, focused, factual, and non-emotional. You get someone to take a look at it, to take out those emotive words or anything that you can say things very well without using certain language that creates more trouble. Certain words, genetic engineering is one of my pet peeves. I don't like those two words together. It is a real thing, but I would rather not do that, because that brings out, there's some baggage to that language. And so do what you can when you are writing, to keep them non-emotional. So whether you're doing proactive or reactive work, think about that audience, messenger. And then nowadays, in this new world of all online all the time and everything being digital, photos, visuals, graphics, snapshots of stats go a long way in helping you get your message out. So I would really consider anything that you do and or write, you send visual photo dashboards, or great on social media. So always have something that's compelling along with your content. So I just put a few things up here. The mediabiasfactcheck.com is a different, the thing I showed, the graphic I showed you is from a different group, and I didn't put that on here, but I'll send it to Juliana later. You can type in any outlet, and it'll give you its estimate of where they are on the factual range. So it's interesting. I use it with a grain of salt, but recently I was doing some research on Guatemalan media outlets, and there weren't very many in there, but it was interesting to see what I found. And then the Center for an Informed Public, I definitely go check that out. There's a paper there by Kate Starbird et al. Here that I would suggest you all read. It's very good, and it talks very specifically about this information that we're sharing today. And then AAAS, if you're not a member, maybe your department is or something else, they have great communications resources on, and that's the American Association for the Advancement of Science. I can't believe I remember that acronym. So follow us at WSU Global Health, and you can see some of the work that we're doing and how I present information there. And like Doug, just email me anytime. Happy to talk more about this body of work.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Laura.
You're welcome.
So I will go look for questions. And it looks like we have one question coming in right now.
Okay.
All right. So the first part of this question is, you talked about the difference between disinformation and misinformation, but mainly about misinformation. Is it worth it to even engage with people spreading disinformation?
Yeah, that one it really depends. It goes back to that, what's the resource what's the outlet that it's in? What's the resource there? If it's in the National Enquirer, I'm going to try. They just operate by a whole different set of rules. I do think, though, that if you have, there's something that's very incorrect out there, putting out a statement with the corrections on your website, on your lab site, or whatever you have, so that people can find it. Or if you get any calls, or there's, I like having a lot of things on the website for posterity, especially with search engine optimization. It can be found. So I would, if there was something that was disinformation, I would start there and put the facts out there on my own channel. And then if it grew to something that was just extraordinary and it became a protest or some sort of organized assault, then yes, we'd have to go into crisis communications and figure out how to manage that. But disinformation is quite difficult in that and that's what all of the big tech companies, Facebook, Twitter, they're all struggling with it because of that free speech, and how do you manage it? And so it's misinformation, I think, is the more reasonable version of trying to get the facts straight.
I'll give about another 20 seconds for questions, but that was the one that we have received so far.
Okay.
Can I comment?
Yes.
I just wanted to mention, so Laura at the very beginning talked about the fact that the understanding of biology is a little compromised in today's day and age. And so something like people are very vulnerable to vaccination stories and claims. That's actually what I would call really low fruit for people like you with your qualifications and expertise, particularly as you gain more. That's a place where you can easily go in on a local level and gently push back and correct people's. And again, you're not writing to that person necessarily, but you're writing to help others who read that understand why that's actually not the way it works. And that's really an important service. Just throw that out there.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Dr. Call, for that as well. And so it looks like we do not have any additional questions that are popping up in our chat. But with that, I think I would like to thank both Dr. Call and Laura Lockard for their time today. And thank you for helping us start the discussion around advocating for science in our communities. I'd also like to thank the audience for their time today.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And some people that we have GPS SPI leadership behind the scenes currently. So Hallie Weimer, who is our vice president, Hayden Wright, who is our treasurer, and Ben Lee, who is our secretary, have all done a lot of work for this seminar as well. So thank you to them. And again, thanks again to our speakers.
You got it. Anytime.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you.